Today on Locked On Red Wings, does a trade with the Buffalo Sabres make sense for both teams?
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. Scotty's the host over at Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News, while I am a color commentator for Oakland University ACHA D1 men's hockey. Scotty, off-day episode for you guys. We want to kind of talk about some of the, rumors, speculation between the Red Wings and the Sabres that have been percolating in social media for the last few days. Hope you liked that word, Scotty. I chose a big word just for you.
It was great.
We had known about the Buffalo Sabres having sending scouts to the Detroit Red Wings games for a while. And for a while, the assumption was that they were scouting the other teams because these teams have already seen each other 3 times this year, 4 times. They're already done playing each other. And on top of that, they're a divisional opponents, so they know each other very well. And so the assumption was they weren't here for us. But then, Elliotte Friedman and Sean Shapiro have indicated that may not be the case, with Elliotte Friedman going on and talking about the fact that the Red Wings and the Buffalo Sabres were actually in talks before the roster freeze, before Christmas, and that may continue now for a trade. And when you compound that, Scotty, with what Elliotte Friedman or what Steve Yzerman said during the introductory press conference for Todd McClellan, that he would be looking for a trade to expedite the rebuild rather than make a trade to shake up the roster, there could be some credence that Detroit and the Buffalo Sabres, and there probably is credence if Elliotte Friedman is talking about it, that they could be in talks to make a trade. That doesn't mean there's a trade happening. It could be as little as they've picked up the phone and said, hey, we're both teams that are underperforming. Do you think a change to both of our rosters could be mutually beneficial? That could be as far as it goes. But that's enough for us, Scotty, to have an episode talking about the Buffalo Sabres, looking at their roster and seeing, are there players on that team that you think Buffalo would be willing to give up for the right price that would also be beneficial for both parties? And that's a fun episode to talk about because I think these are both teams that have a lot of young talent on their teams, but are just not working out with the given systems that both teams are playing in.
Yeah, it's a weird fit for trade partners because I feel like both teams, and maybe I'm wrong on this, maybe one of the two front offices don't want to head in a upward trajectory necessarily. Maybe they're, I don't know, like Buffalo's willing to throw in the towel, or I can't imagine that the Wings are want to enter another rebuild already or anything like that. But I don't know. I guess I'm not in those rooms, but I have a hard time believing that either of these teams is ready to be like a hardcore seller, right? So it's a weird fit that there is so much smoke surrounding a trade between these two teams, yet they're both kind of in the interest of finding pieces that would lead to long-term success. So, if you can fill, a hole on the Wings with a hole on the Sabres, then there you go. That would be, I guess, a way to do that. And we'll have that conversation today. But I think my initial kind of reaction is just, I know we were talking about this plenty off air too, was just that it's kind of a weird fit just because of where both teams are at and what they're trying to accomplish in the direction they're trying to head.
Right. It's the perceived spot these teams are at in their rebuilds, right? Both of these teams are 1 and 2 for longest playoff droughts in the NHL. Sabres and Red Wings.
Jeez.
Both teams trying to make an upswing into the playoffs. Both teams underperforming that. Both teams with tons of young players. So the perceived return on any given trade would be another player of similar regard to the player you would want, a young player with, if not term, arbitration rights that you can then, make piece of your core. That's the same thing that the other team would probably want back. So who on the Red Wings are you willing to give up to make that trade happen? You're looking at not just you don't want to make just a lateral move. Yzerman said it. You want to make a move that would expedite the rebuild. So it would have to be a move for a impact player, but also be of good value for a team in a similar spot. And that's where it's really tough to have this conversation. Yeah. But without further ado, Scotty, you saw and you had read a couple of names that you could see a team like Buffalo, who are stagnant in their rebuild, maybe moving on if it meant getting a player back that they think that could just be a good fit for them and take them further. Remember, they made the lateral move, trading Casey Middlestad away from Bowen Byram. Not necessarily a lateral move, but two young players that maybe wanted a change of scenery. And so, hey, maybe Byram's on that list. Let's see.
No, for sure. I think that's a good place to start. Like, I think that it is. I think that if you're drawing names, if you're throwing out names on Buffalo's roster that makes sense for them to trade, I think he is undoubtedly one of them. And like I said, from where the Wings sit, I mean that's certainly a role that would need to be filled. It's just like when you think of what do the Red Wings need right now, there's not much they don't need. Like it's not like, oh, we're just a really one good goalie away from being really good, or one good defender away from just this thing completely turning around. Like, and Rome wasn't built in a day. I understand that they acquiring those pieces and slowly gathering those assets and those pieces over time is the way to go. But if you're, as you stated, you better be getting someone that is going to be here for a prolonged period of time, because makes no sense for them to go after somebody who is going to be a free agent this year at the end of the season or anything like that. So I think that I really do think that he's a good place to start, just because his name's going to be thrown out there a lot as we get closer to the deadline. And I think it kind of makes sense for Buffalo.
Yeah. And I mean, that was a guy that they acquired last year. He's 6'1" left shot defenseman, can play both sides. However, his contract, when it expires at the end of this season, is going to be arbitration eligible, and he's only 23 years old. So he's an RFA on top of everything. There's a lot there to like. There's also a lot left to be desired. Like, there's a reason why Colorado moved on from him. He was taken early, and he was taken 4th overall in 2019. That was Moritz Seider's draft.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is a guy who everyone had such high expectations from, and he has not lived quite up to those in his tenure with the Colorado Avalanche, but he's having a nice bounce-back year this year. He's got 20 points in 37 games played. That's the same amount that Moritz Seider has. Now, the deployments that he is getting is nowhere near Seider's deployments, as no one in the league touches Edmondson and Seider are at.
Nobody's is, yeah.
But to be fair, the quality of competition he is facing with the Buffalo Sabres is tantamount to the same quality competition that Ben Sherratt's getting, your second pair, now top pair, but for the bulk of the season has been second pair defenseman. And he's been handling it amicably. I mean, he has been put in situations against tough opponents, and he's come away with 20 points in 37 games. It's the highest clip he's had so far in his young career. And with the cap situation that Buffalo Sabres are running into very quickly here, this is they might not necessarily have the money to pay him at the end of this season. So it could make sense for the Red Wings to acquire him, because they're looking for Red Wings need blue line help. But does it make sense for the Sabres to give up him without getting blue line help in return? Because that's a serious area of need, right? Young offense is not the problem with the Sabres. Just like the Red Wings, another similarity between these two teams, it's defense. So while it might help the Red Wings to gain a defender, what are you going to give up to get Bowen Byram, a young defender, arbitration eligible? He's an RFA who's got potential. What are you going to have to give up to acquire him that makes sense for Buffalo, who are in a very similar spot and are going to want a player of similar caliber?
Right. And then, as you mentioned, then you get into the real kind of square peg round hole, where it's the fact that if they are giving up a defender, almost assuredly you're going to have to give back a defender in some capacity. That doesn't mean that the defenseman is an NHL player. I think it maybe even makes more sense if it's a young, I don't know, like is Aljo on the block? Like he's young and whatnot, but I don't know how much value does Aljo have. Like, the only thing he really has going for him this year is the fact that he is young, and you could mold him into hopefully bottom four. Solidified bottom four type of defenseman. But I think you're probably looking at then a defensive prospect. And at that point, is that a trade-off you want to make? Is the long-term kind of big picture of the organization, does it make more sense to bring in young defensive help now? If you can lock him up long-term, if he's going to be here for a minute, then I really have no issue with it. But And like you said, arbitration eligible, certainly still going to be here for the foreseeable future. But that is the question you kind of have to ask yourself, is then you turn to, okay, is giving up a young AHL defenseman that we really like and are pretty fond of worth bringing in that? And I think more times than not, probably, but depends on the defender too.
Right. Like, okay, so I don't think you're giving up Axel Sandin Pellikka. You're not giving up Simon Edvinsson.
Right.
Sandin Pellikka wouldn't even help with he's on the blue line, yeah, but he's an offense first defenseman. Like, they need defensive help. They already have Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power for points. They got, Bowen Byram right now. Like, they need to get better defensively. So they need a defenseman who can do that. So Antti Tuomisto and William Wallander are probably two of your best prospects.
How about we just do Jeff Petrie straight up?
Right. Like, that doesn't help them. What would they want? Like, you can offer Tuomisto. I think that'd be a fine start. But, like, if you're a Red Wings fan, I should say, that'd be a good start. But, how many years away is he to being an NHL caliber player? Right. You'd have to add more on that. Do they want picks and prospects? Like, I don't think so. Because, again, the similar situation.
Right. They're trying to get better now.
Right. Just like you. And so both teams are probably going to have players that they'd want to bring in somebody, but wouldn't want to give up their young players. But both teams are going to want young players in return. Right. So that's why, like, it's interesting that these two teams are in talks with one another, because there's so much in the same category. I know there's another player too that we're going to talk about here in segment 2 on the front end of the ice on offense that I feel like the situation kind of applies to. So stay tuned to segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. We'll talk about that. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? They definitely helped me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even know or realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. We talked about Bowen Byram, and again, I think he could fit in Detroit, but I don't know if the cost is there. I don't know if the Red Wings are willing to pay the cost to acquire him when it's going to probably cost you somebody of similar caliber, or if they have somebody of similar caliber available, because I think Simon Edvinsson and Moritz Seider are better than Bowen Byram, and the next best thing you have in your system are either players who aren't ready for the NHL yet or seventh defenseman at best.
Right.
I think the other name that we see floating around a lot on social media is Dylan Cousins. Dylan Cousins is another really good young player. He's also 23, 7th overall, taken one pick after Moritz Seider in 2019, 2 2019 first-round picks by the Buffalo Sabres there. He's having a pretty okay year so far, pretty good year, 19 points in 37 games, just a hair over half point per game. Definitely a down year for somebody who had 68 and 81 back in 23, had 31 goals in that season. So there's somebody right there who's a lot more offense in him. His contract is good through the end of the 29-30 year when he'll be 28, so he's signed a term already, so you don't got to worry about signing him. But then the contract salary becomes part of the conversation there. Would you want this strong center left wing who shoots right on your team? Absolutely. There is a lot, just like Bowen Byram, there is a lot of upside still left in this player, even if he's not playing as well as he has in the past. But what, Scotty, would it take to acquire him if you're the Buffalo Sabres?
Yeah, and that is obviously the biggest question. Is it would be a decent price tag, right? Again, like he's
right.
under contract for a long time. We talk about it all the time here, and I talk about it all the time on the Tigers show too, right? Is like team control and contract status really does determine value so unbelievably much in sports. And so you're going to have to pay a pretty penny. I think it is, if there's anybody on the Sabres that I think they should trade, it is probably Dylan Cousins, because I think that it's most bang for your buck, right? Like, he hasn't been unbelievably productive, but there's obviously another level there that he's not reaching, and I think that you could get a decent return for him. It is the interesting thing from the Wings perspective is for the first time ever, I say ever, so the first time since you and I have hosted this show, from the Wings perspective, you actually have to care about the salary cap a little bit. And that is something that we have not been used to, right? The Wings have had the most salary cap available in the sport for what seems like the last 4 years. They have just the most cap space. Now, I mean, this last offseason, obviously after the extensions to Seider and Raymond, they went up against the cap for the first time since we've been hosting this show. And while they obviously could pull this off, and I'm not saying it's like an impossible move, but it very easily still could. They have money coming off the books this summer as well. You got to start thinking long term. Who are the intangible type of players? Who are the players that you don't want to get moved off your roster, are going to be a part of your core, and you have no problem being a majority of your cap for the next 5 years. And if you make that trade, obviously he is one of said players. So.
Yeah, and he's a player that's been struggling this year with the Buffalo Sabres, so a change of scenery, you could argue, would make a lot of sense. Red Wings are having trouble scoring goals. I mean, obviously, we both agree that the goals are there. It's just about getting it out of these players. Yeah. The bigger problem for us is the defensive core, so just like Buffalo, we want better blue line. But
right.
Would I welcome acquiring Dylan Cousins? Yeah, absolutely. What would I be willing to give up? I could see myself... you get yourself in trouble with the fan base when you say stuff like this. I could see myself parting ways with the Marco Kasper for Dylan Cousins if the price is right. Just because Dylan Cousins is already with the team. He's at the NHL level. He's a little bit more seasons, and we've seen that the offense is there with him. He's having a down year. But again, it would be the price is right. I'm not chomping at the bit, but it's just like a proven commodity type thing. And we already know with Dylan Cousins, we already know a little bit more what he's going to look like at the NHL level at 23. But I still think that Marco Kasper and Nick Danielson could have a much more tremendous upside than Dylan Cousins, but that's all. But again, we still have yet to see that. And if you're looking to expedite your rebuilds, that's how it would go. But at the same time, would Buffalo be willing to make that trade right now? Because again, Dylan Cousins is more NHL ready right now. You'd be betting on the future again, and they want to get ready now. So again, who do you move?
Right. Yeah. Weird fit, as we've been talking about this whole time. I think Kasper's an interesting conversation thing because I think a lot of the fan base would still be really hesitant to do that, and I totally understand it. I know you totally understand it too, but I think that one is, do you want to preach patience and see what Kasper turns into, or do you want to get more of a, as you said, proven commodity right now? Because and that's the weird thing about where the Wings are right now, right? We need to get better. Okay, well, I mean, we can trade Kasper for somebody that's better than Kasper right now because he is so young, and a team is gonna, try to project his total value. But in a year or two, if he ends up being better than that guy, then you look like an idiot. So it's a very fine line to walk. I agree with you. I wouldn't be chomping at the bit to do that either. I wouldn't move.
It would make me
for
feel.
Him, but I don't know. It's if his ceiling is 2C, then you're like, all right, well, we can get a score in our top 6, on the wing that is going to be here for the next 5 years at least. I understand the mindset.
Any trade with either of those two players would make me feel, by two players, I mean Kasper and Danielson, would make me feel incredibly uneasy. But that's the price you pay in this type of situation. Again, it all depends on what the two teams are looking for.
Right. And that's the okay, your hardcore buying, right? You're trying to get immediately better right now. I understand that. I don't know. It's tough, man. I don't think the Wings, it's just so weird. It's so weird. They could trade off a lot of their younger players and get, older guys that are better right now. Not that Cousins is over the hill or anything, obviously still in the hopefully prime years of his career. But it's you could, but it would be a heck of a price to pay. And I think there's a chance that Kasper ends up with a higher ceiling at the end of the day too. So
Well, and that doesn't also solve the cap situation either, because
Right.
Marco Casper's on an ELC. So, like, even if I would be willing to part ways with Marco Casper for the right price, it doesn't make sense numbers-wise. It doesn't make sense mathematically. So, like, I don't... And, I mean, and I want to make sure I put this out there. I would rather keep Marco Casper and watch him grow, like, because I know we're very protective of our prospects, and I am very protective of our prospects. But if the cost of making this team better was moving on from one of the young players, like, that's how you build teams, not just
Right.
through those trades with those assets. But I would much rather to hold on to those players than move on from them. But if what's the cost of doing business in a trade of that caliber? Like, that's probably what it would be, because it's the only player of similar regard to Dylan Cousins that the Red Wings have at the moment. And are you comfortable making that trade? I'd be uncomfortable doing it. But and again, it wouldn't be one for one. But what else do you have to offer them? You don't have anything on the blue line you're willing to part with.
Well, that's the weirdest part about the way that the Wings roster is constructed right now. When you're talking about like long-term assets and tradable pieces, there's very little like middle class. Like it's like this guy has immense trade value and is like a building block for the future that we would have to get ridiculously paid to be able to move on from, and we're not going to trade him. Or it's like, this dude has literally zero trade value. What are we even talking about? Nobody wants him. Like, there's very little. There's only a couple guys that are outside of those two categories. So it becomes a very stressful conversation really quickly.
Yeah, I mean, those are the two names that like stand out the most that I feel like Buffalo would be willing to move on from. But there's a ton of conversation you could have around, Alex Tuch as well, who's 28 years old. His contract's up at the end of next year. He's not over the hill yet either. I don't think Peyton Krebs. I think they still think that he's the same. Another 2019 first round pick overall, 17th overall. I don't know, man. They got a lot of really good young talent on that hockey team. They just need blue line help, just like the Red Wings. I see those teams talking. According to Elliotte Friedman, I just don't see how it would work. I don't see how they would swing a trade with one another that would both mutually beneficial for the teams in the moment. Like, I just don't get it. So, anyways, let us know your thoughts.
Right. I agree with you. We're talking about all these hypotheticals. I think the most likely scenario is they don't make a trade.
Right. Which more often than not is what ends up happening, is nothing.
Right.
So we'll end up keeping all our boys, and they'll keep all their boys, and we'll both end up underperforming on the season, and then we'll talk about improvements in the offseason.
Word.
Pittsburgh Penguin preview coming up next. Penguin singular.
Penguin singular.
Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast. All right. Pittsburgh Penguins, Detroit Red Wings playing on New Year's Eve. This game, where's this game happening at? Is it in Detroit? I should probably know this. Shame on me for not knowing off the top of my head. It is in Detroit, part of this homestand that the Red Wings have. Penguins have 39 points on the season, I believe. You're 9 points back of them, or 7 points back of them, rather, after your win against Washington. They are just outside the final wild card spot. They are an aging core. They have already beaten you a couple times on the season, I believe. So, yeah. No, the Red Wings won in overtime. That was the Simon Edvinsson, so they're 1-1 against each other. This is a team we've seen twice, but the big change now is obviously new head coach, new system that they're trying to implement. So, I mean, you're really going to be looking at Detroit and see how they handle it now.
Yeah, believe it or not, the Wings are favored here.
Really? Home game.
Home game, new coach. Vibes are high coming off of a big performance against the Capitals. So yeah, that's kind of surprising to me. We'll see if that moves from now until until the game is actually played. But kind of interesting there. The Penguins team we've talked about it, like you said, a few times this year already. But this is just a team that is very, very sound on special teams. Is very still has weapons. They're aging, but still has weapons to produce points and produce goals, and is in the middle of the pack in offense. They are just an absolute embarrassment and abomination defensively. And when it comes to letting goals in, they are 32nd for those keeping track at home. That is last place in the NHL in goals against a game. They're in the bottom 8 in the league in save percentage. They just allow a ton of goals, but they still have goal scorers. They still have a pair of, one of the most talented duos in the history of hockey, one of the most talented players in the history of hockey. And they're always going to be somewhat of a threat because of that. But this is a team that, in theory, you should be able to kind of put the puck in the back of the net against. So naturally, we'll get shut out now. But that is new coach, new us, right? New year too. New coach, new year,
new year, new me.
Let's score. Let's score some goals and put up a crooked number against the team that is consistently giving up crooked numbers all year.
Yeah, I mean, they are 11th in goals for in all situations at 5-on-5. They're 9th in goals for. So like you said, to add on to that, they give up a lot of goals, but they score a lot too in return. And, that's pretty par for the course for an aging core. Sidney Crosby, who used to be one of the best two-way centers in the game, is pretty much all one-way now. He's pretty much all goal scoring. He's got 40 points on the season. Still spectacular in the offensive zone. Erik Karlsson's been fantastic. Richard Rakell's got 31 and 38. Evgeny Malkin's no slouch either, although he's been getting mostly assists so far this season with 30 points in 38 games. So, if you can manage to limit their offense, you're going to get your opportunities in the offensive zone. And if they play like they did against Washington, I think they have, like you said, a very good chance. But the special teams is going to be scary because they have the 5th best power play and the 7th best penalty kill. And that's where they thrive. But their goaltending has been very shaky. So, again, if you just get into the offensive zone and limit their chances, you're going to put yourself in a very good position to win this hockey game. For the first time in a long time, I'm very excited to watch Red Wings hockey just to see how this team plays underneath new coaching, new system.
Yeah. I mean, that's the fun part about these games is we're going to see some line combinations we haven't seen much of this year. Last game, we obviously had top line Joe Veleno, which we talked about then. So we'll see what happens with that. We shook up the blue line a little bit, which thank goodness, long overdue there. It'll be really interesting to see what happens on the sheet in this game. But I also think when it comes to, as you said, the system, maybe we'll start grasping a little bit more of the concept of what the system is going to be going forward, and if they're able to possess the puck for a prolonged period of time, et cetera, et cetera. So that'll be intriguing to watch for sure.
Absolutely. Scotty, you have anything else to say?
I don't think so, man. We ball.
We do ball. We'll be back with a new episode tomorrow. Wait, double checking that. Yeah, I think we will. We'll probably will
after the game
later
tomorrow,
in the day.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Right.
New Year's Eve.
New Year's Eve.
Yeah, but we're planning. So, okay, here's the breakdown. Well, I'll try to explain it to the people.
On air, we're doing it?
It's going to be wonky, all right? It's going to be wonky. And this is easier than putting out a social graphic later. All right, so we will not be recording on New Year's Eve. So there will not be a game recap immediately. But Scotty and I are both off on New Year's Day. We both, or at least I don't have anything else going on. I have no life. Scotty said he's available on New Year's Day. So there will be a game recap. There will be an episode on New Year's Day. But that means that we will not be recording for Thursday. So basically, New Year's Eve and New Year's Day means you will not be getting a January 2nd episode because we're recording the game recap in the middle of the day on Wednesday, and it makes no sense to then just put it off until the next day. Might as well just post it when it's ready. So episode in the middle of the day on New Year's rather than at midnight, and then no episode on the 2nd.
Boom.
It's going to be very bizarre. So, same time, same place. See your team every day.
Every day.